Spring football has arrived in some places. It's about to arrive in other places. I want to work my way around several conferences. I'm going to start with the SEC tonight. Some big spring questions. There is this fine balance in spring. I talk about this all the time, sort of in the summer, what I call preview magazine season, leading up to the start of the regular season. And it's when you start filling out sort of your mental bank of information. Spring football is really when we start to do it around here. And so, you start to learn the rosters, you start to learn some notable names, who transferred where, who declared for the draft, some depth chart stuff. Yeah, you start to formulate all that in your mind. What I want you to be careful of, and again, we're all about sounding very, very smart around the water cooler, and eventually, maybe if you're about this sort of thing, winning some money on this in the fall. You got to be careful not to marry yourself to any of these opinions. That's why we don't throw out big, broad opinions in the spring or really even SEC Media Day or Big Ten Media Day season in the summer. There's nothing with which to be strongly opinionated on quite yet. You get into fall camp, you start getting whispers from people on the ground, well, then our tone changes around here a little bit. So be careful. I'm about to talk about a bunch of programs right now. You just got to be careful. Just take it, filter it properly, and put it in the back of your mind. Don't start making your preseason projections in the middle of March. At Georgia, let's start there. Going to be a lot of talk, as there should be, about JT Daniels, about the quarterback situation. I'm watching that too very intently. Let's not overthink the room here. That's going to ultimately decide whether Georgia wins the SEC East this year or not. There's going to be plenty of focus there. I will just tell you, because of the next facet of Georgia's team that I'm about to talk about, I don't doubt for a second that this year, this 2021 season, will be the strongest that Kirby Smart will have ever been predisposed to lighting a match under his offense. Part of that reason is because he probably thinks he's got the personnel to do it now, whereas he may not have felt totally comfortable with that in the past. Let me tell you the other part, though. I'm looking at a list here of experienced corners that Georgia has. The list is blank. There are none. There are some talented guys here, but with Tyreek Stevenson transferring out, who we're going to talk about later in the show, I'm looking at Keely Ringo, big-time name, no experience. Amir Speed, Nyland Green, Jalen Kimber, all these were big-time names. You're not on the field for Georgia if you weren't an elite recruit. None of them have any experience. And so what I'm looking at is I'm watching Georgia this fall, and I'm watching them play teams like Clemson, and I'm watching them obviously go through conference play in the SEC, and I am, I'm kind of rubbing the magic 8 ball right now, and I'm seeing some teams able to throw on them, and I'm seeing them potentially struggle to get off the field, some on third down. You're going to have to be able to score. Kirby Smart knows this. This is not something that's going to occur to him in like week 3 of the season. They know it right now. So you got a confluence of a couple of events. Number one, this should be, when they decided to crank it up a little bit offensively anyway. Finally got the quarterback they need, got a lot of receiver talent. But the second part is it's going to have to be done by necessity. They're going to have to score, probably going to have to score a little bit more than they're used to. Let's go and hop on I-20 and head west about 3 or 4 hours, and let's go to Tuscaloosa. Wide receiver and offensive line is what we here are paying very, very close attention to with Alabama. I want you to imagine something, because you can't imagine this with any other team. There's no other program out there, don't care who it is, where you're changing quarterbacks and you're losing guys like Jalen Waddle and Devontae Smith, Najee Harris, Mac Jones, not to mention multiple starters on the offensive line and replacing an offensive coordinator, and yet still looking at that team and saying, yeah, but I'll probably start them number 1 in the country anyway. Yeah, they'll still be the preseason favorite and the best conference in America anyway. It's kind of second nature now with Alabama. It's amazing the thoroughness which that machine operates now, to where you can just kind of think like that and you're not even alone thinking that way. So they'll still be the assumed number 1 here. John Mechie is a guy who they're going to obviously look to kind of step up, because now over the span of 2 years, forget just 1 year, over 2 years now, yeah, you've seen Jalen Waddle leave, you've seen Devontae Smith leave, you've also seen Ruggs, and you've seen Jerry Jeudy leave. Like, that's a lot of talent that's headed out here over the span of 24 months. And you've now said goodbye to Mac Jones. So there's not a lot of doubt in Tuscaloosa about whether Bryce Young can get the job done. I don't think there's nearly as much debate, let's say, in the quarterback competition as will be manufactured over the offseason. It's Bryce Young's job. Like, there'll be a lot of dust created over the summer. It's going to be Bryce Young's job, barring injury, of course. But some of these names, like Bama players and fans, they know the names like Xavier Williams, Ty Jones-Bell. I was really looking forward to Javon Baker last year. Didn't get on the field quite as much as we thought he would. But then they got all these newcomers coming in. 3 of these dudes, the ones I'm about to mention, they're on campus for spring ball. Ja'Cory Brooks, Aggie A. Hall, Christian Leary, they're all on campus this spring. So the part A there is, how many of those guys who have waited their turn are ready to be legitimate studs, which is what you have to be to play wide receiver for Alabama, or how many of these new guys are immediately ready to jump into starting jobs. But I say all that with the backdrop being offensive line, which is also just kind of assumed at Alabama right now. But they lost Deontay Brown, they lost Landon Dickerson, and they lost Alex Leatherwood. They just landed the top 2 tackles in the country. That's good. They may need them. They've got really good depth there. That's good. Thus far, it's unproven. Again, these are questions we've learned not to really ask or worry about a whole lot about when it comes to Alabama, but that's what God created spring football for. At Auburn, Bo Nix. Bo Nix. When I say that, what comes to mind? Probably an overthrow by about 12 yards, probably terrible footwork, probably 3rd and 17. That's probably what comes to mind when I say Bo Nix right now. It's been such a strange career because I'm still adamant that Bo Nix, if Lincoln Riley, just to pick a name out of the air that's good at developing quarterbacks, if Lincoln Riley were to have come into Alabama and recruited Bo Nix and landed him, I think Bo Nix would be a star quarterback at Oklahoma. Because in terms of physical traits, I think he's got everything you need. I think he went into a terrible situation, a horribly ill-equipped program at that point under Gus Malzahn to develop his skill set. And so now, physically, like his game has been a mess. It's been totally inconsistent. Mentally, he's been totally inconsistent. And so now, the big question with him is, how much do you have to deprogram him? How much do you have to rewire him? Because if he was a true freshman, it'd be one thing. Like I think Harsin and Bobo would probably almost rather inherit true freshman Bo Nix. Because, yeah, he'd be a lump of Play-Doh, but at least you could start to mold it immediately. Right now, you got to demold it from what it has been and then go to work on remolding it. And they lose Seth Williams, they lose Schwartz, they lose Eli Stove there. So a lot of the dependable factors that he had out wide to lean on, they're gone. Tank Bigsby's back in the backfield. But I wonder over the course of spring, and they'll start to get a feel for it as a coaching staff too, like what are they really dealing with Bo Nix? Is this a guy who you can just take one brush of the eraser and wipe the slate clean? Or is it something where when you get to the end of spring, you're only just scratching the surface of kind of getting him set mentally? And at that point, I mean, like, you don't have a whole lot of time left. You're going to have some off-season stuff you can't really legally participate in, and then you got fall camp. And at that point, you got to be installing. Like, you got to be ready to play games by then. How about LSU? I wrote defense. Not even one position, not even one person. I'm just watching defense for LSU. I'll first be watching what impact there is when guys on defense finally have a coordinator they actually, want to play for. That's always nice to have in your back pocket. So Durante Jones is the new DC there, for those of you unfamiliar. He's come in. He replaces Bo Pelini. There is a theory on returning starters out there, a couple of them actually. Some people love returning starters as this blanket stat, and they don't really care what the production was the year before. Other folks like to have a bunch of returning starters if they're coming back from a team that was good. If the team was terrible, they'd just rather hit the flush button and then start over. Well, at LSU, we don't have either of those categories. We have a bunch of guys coming back from a unit that was terrible last year. So you can take a couple of schools of thought. If you're an LSU fan or you're just going to watch LSU, you could think that a lot of that was a byproduct of second time we've used this word tonight, a confluence of horrible events, up to and including hiring Bo Pelini last year, and then they're just going to be a lot better this year, fresh start, etc. Or you could say, got a lot of guys coming back, not so sure I am buying in yet, remains to be seen for me. I can tell you they're ultra excited down there, but then again, I don't know how much to believe in that because this was the same program whose head coach told me last year that we have upgraded defensively. Well, they hadn't. So, yeah, you got a lot of guys who were at one time big deals on the recruiting trail. It was a win when LSU landed all these guys. They don't lose very much at all. They got a lot of guys coming back. You know, maybe it's a neck up thing. Hopefully it is. I don't think they can get worse. There were some statistical categories, LSU, important statistical categories. They were in the hundreds in, which is inexcusable, obviously. And last but not least, staying in the SEC West here, I go to College Station. And I look at Texas A&M, and all the questions are going to be about quarterback. Kellen Mond's been there for like a decade. He's gone. So Haynes King is going to be the presumed starter. That is something I agree with. However, that probably won't be where most of my focus is for the spring because I'm looking at their offensive line, which was to me, I said at the end of last season, probably the most anonymous great unit in America was Texas A&M's offensive line. They just did their job. In fact, if you were to go back to 2019, I wrote it down somewhere. 2019, yeah. So they had 34 sacks given up in 2019. They gave up 7 last year. Just quantum leap of improvement. Well, now they lose 4 out of those 5 guys. So we come back to that familiar conundrum. returning starters. How much do they matter? Well, you're losing a bunch of starters off a really good unit here. So for all the talk, validly so, that will be put out there over the offseason about Haynes King, man, keep a close eye on those practice reports out of College Station about this offensive line, because that ultimately is going to determine probably the difference between what Haynes King even has a shot to do this year, and as default, what Texas A&M has a shot to do. We're going to do that about a bunch of conferences. That was just some kind of hop, skip, and a jump around the SEC tonight. Spring football is a great time of year.